Good morning, lovely people. How is your day starting out? Oh, how is your day starting out? Yeah, we love to hear it. That's a bit more like it. Thank you so much, Elle, for getting us started, and thank you for our wonderful speakers so far. I feel like we've started on a real high, and hopefully we can keep that up for our next session about the power of play. Are we all feeling playful today? Oh, again, are we all feeling playful today? Yes, and hopefully we will be even more so by the end of this session. So we're all here, as Elle said, to think about the way collaboration can impact entertainment content for good. And intentionally or otherwise, creators across the entertainment industry have incredible power to reinforce or to challenge worldviews, values, and messages through our work. This panel is specifically looking to explore how industry professionals can harness that influence responsibly, as well as how we can collaborate with experts from a range of different backgrounds and disciplines, from the charity sector, from academia, from research, to create more thoughtful and impactful content. So without further ado, let me introduce the panel. First, we welcome the wonderful Charly Conquest. Charly is the responsible productions lead at Sky Entertainment. Charly supports Sky original commissions to transition to lower carbon production methods and approach each project with sustainability in mind, as well as creating a culture based around well-being, access, and inclusion for both cast and crew. Charly is currently working with an impact producer who's been embedded from start to finish in the Sky TV's new original series, The Dyer's Caravan Park, starring Danny Dyer. Thank you so much. Join me in welcoming Charly. This is like a lot of things to hold, so bear with me while I'm juggling. Next, we welcome the wonderful Danny Gray. Danny is the Chief Creative Officer and Game Director at ustwo Games. Danny leads the creative vision of a studio that's released award-winning titles such as Monument Valley, Assemble with Care, Alba, A Wildlife Adventure, and more recently, Desta, The Memories Between. Prior to his 10 years with ustwo Games, Danny spent his time at Hello Games and Lionhead Studios with an insight on development, large and small. Danny champions the telling of underrepresented stories and inciting positive change through play. Please join me in welcoming Danny Gray. Next, we welcome Dr. Howard Fine, a consultant clinical psychologist for entertainment and founder of Mind Zone Media. For the last 18 years, he's specialized in supporting film, TV, podcasts, and digital-first and media production companies in the key areas of mental health, psychological risk management for production teams, cast and talent, and contributors. Howard has worked on high-profile shows like SAS, Who Dares Wins, Squid Games, anybody? Traitors, anybody? Educating Yorkshire, Big Brother, and many more. I have lots of follow-ups on Big Brother. And lastly, joining our wonderful panel, Professor Panayiota Tsatsou, a professor in media diversity at the Lenny Henry Centre for Media Diversity at Birmingham City University. She's an internationally recognized expert whose research addresses issues around media diversity, digital inequalities, and intersectional vulnerabilities. She has led and collaborated on major projects funded by the AHRC, British Academy, and Nuffield Foundation. Professor Panayiota has also produced some new research called Authentic Portrayal in UK Media, insights from expert panels on race, diversity, disability, and class, which demands a redistribution of power in media storytelling. Please welcome our wonderful panel. Thank you. Brilliant, let's get into it. When it comes to exploring the impact of entertainment, there are a wealth of stakeholders in this conversation. There's a wealth of disciplines that we can learn from and a range of expertise that can lead to really, really brilliant content, from research to science to creativity to production skills. And this panel represents just that, the wide range of expertise that can feed into making brilliant content. So let's start at the beginning with this conversation. With regards to your work and your modes of creativity, what do you understand impact to mean? And what do you understand playfulness to mean? And I'm going to start with you, Charly.
Thank you very much. So, in terms of impact for us at Sky Entertainment Group, it's baked into our purpose that the production of all our Sky originals will be a force for good. And so it's about enacting that in the communities that we film in with our crews and when we're communicating to our audiences. And then what playfulness means, I think in the current context of the TV landscape, is allowing our producers to take calculated risks and giving them the tools to do that and supporting them in doing that.
Thank you. We love that. Calculated risk. We'll come back to that, I think. Danny, over to you. How do you understand impact and what do you understand by playfulness?
I think the two of them kind of do different things. So play is very much what we do in the moment while we're playing the game, right? Like it's there for a form of entertainment. It's there to ask you questions and overcome things within the second. But impact is whether or not that experience lasts with you tomorrow and the week after and the month after that. Did we leave you with something beyond simple, playful entertainment? Something that maybe changed your mind on the future or yourself?
Thank you so much. And Howard, how would you understand impact and playfulness?
I think it's to do with responsibility on both those fronts. In terms of impact, people are consuming more media content, game content. They're on their screens more time than ever before. And so we have an opportunity here to communicate and have an impact on how they consume and understand maybe social messages, public interaction. So impact is how do we pass on certain messaging. In terms of play, I mean, just have fun, right? Everything that we do should be about having fun. When it comes to reality TV, I think it's so much nicer to focus on projects where the Freudenfreude. So Schadenfreude is where we take pleasure out of viewing somebody else's pain, which might have been the more historical aspects of Big Brother, or maybe aspects of Traitors sometimes, where they're not having such a good time. But I like the idea of Freudenfreude, which is I will get pleasure out of your pleasure. If I see somebody else having a good time and being playful, I'm going to enjoy that too. And I think that's with every element of entertainment and consumerism, having fun with that process. And I think it's so much easier to do and engages with an audience, engages with contributors on TV. So for me, it is all about fun.
Thank you so much. And Professor Panayiota, what does impact and what does playfulness mean for you?
Yeah, I will say that obviously I agree with everything the amazing panelists here have said, but I would like to add that impact can be either positive or not that positive or even negative. So obviously, when we refer to the impact of the industry, of the entertainment industry, we're always going to think of impact as something positive. And to me, impact, positive impact, and playfulness are not separate. We should not be looking at them in isolation. Actually, playfulness can be an important medium, an important channel to achieve positive impact. Impact on people's mental well-being as well as everyday life experiences. So playfulness, playful content, for instance, can help people improve their everyday lives. But at the same time, it can teach them how they can be playful, what Charlie said, taking calculated risks, seeing life and everyday experiences in a lighter, more positive tone. So to me, playfulness and impact, positive impact, go together. And playfulness is both the channel, the medium, as well as one important dimension aspect of positive impact.
Thank you so much. And I think what's coming out of these answers is that playfulness is both method and mode. So you can have play as a creative mode in a literal sense, gaming, being in that game, using that agency, gaming competition shows like Big Brother, watching people in difficult scenarios. Sometimes the playfulness is part of the mode, part of the creativity that we're watching, the output. And sometimes it's method. How does playfulness help us arrive at a conclusion? How does it shape our approach to production? How does it foster the creativity that can also pour out in our impact? And also a really important provocation here that we need to not assume that impact is always positive. We're aspiring to positive impact, but we also need to take note of when that impact isn't necessarily what we intend. And that feels like a really helpful kind of word of note for those of us in this room. So thank you so much for that start. I'm going to hand back for my next question, which is where we've seen really good examples of collaboration. So, Charlie, you have a lot of experience in the space of productions. How and where have you seen the best case studies of embedding equitable ways of working and practices into production processes?
So I think the way that we always work is some of our solutions are templated, so they work for everyone, and then we always have a really bespoke lens to what we do, because we have respect for the producers and what they're trying to achieve. So there are things that we do as screen skills that we ask all of our crews to complete, either leadership and management training or unconscious bias training, so that we know there's that level of understanding that everybody should have when they're working on our productions. And that's a code of conduct that is shared, with the BBC, with ITV, with Channel 4, with all of our partners. But then we go, I guess, one step further in then making sure that we are tailoring what we want to do to that show and to those producers. So I can see some lovely Herd people in the room who I want to name check, because to give an example, so we worked on a show with BBC Studios about, it was Big Zoo and AJ, and they were going around the world, and they were trying some of the most high-end cuisine that they could find. So not an obvious climate content story, but through working with their team right from the outset and finding the right language and the right tools with the Herd team, we managed to embed some of that storytelling through the production. And then I think that just creates such a culture of, it's part of the communication, like sustainability, equity, inclusion is embedded in the language of how we speak about the show on and off screen, and then it just becomes kind of second nature. So yeah, that's probably my first example.
Thank you. And I'm going to dig a bit more. You've really shared the importance of kind of having dual models, so having a template model that you can reuse and you can apply as kind of a base standard for what we're aspiring to. But honestly, as somebody whose whole career has been in equity work, often isn't seen as playful, seen as very dull, very dry. So where is the space for playfulness in creating kind of a base standard that allows people to feel included, welcome, able to access? Where's the space for playfulness in that?
So one example that I can give is, so many of us who work in TV will understand we send out a green memo. And I think what you've just said there is probably a really great example of what green memos usually look like. They get attached to an email with lots and lots of other attachments, and it can get, just lost in the melee. But it might have some really interesting and useful tips inside of it. So we thought, is there a more impactful, playful way of creating a green memo? So we got the lovely Ramesh Ranganathan on board to run a fake sustainable productions meeting. And we did it as like a 3-minute sketch. And so that now goes out to all of our productions. And the reason behind that is we know not everybody's somebody who likes to read to learn. They like to see to learn. There's so many reasons why that might not be the most accessible way for us to get that important message across. And also, humour is just such an important vehicle for when you're trying to communicate something that's important to everyone, but that could come across as quite dry and dense. And so, yeah, that's kind of one way, and that's something that we have spun out across all productions. And then we are also looking at how we can embed impact producers, many of whom are in the room and are absolutely wonderful, in areas outside of natural history and international docs, which are kind of the traditional background. If it's a model that works and we're getting that engagement and we're making a difference in communities, then why can we not also do that in the entertainment sphere, in children's? So that's what we've been doing with, as I say, some of the wonderful faces in this room.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. My next question is to you, Danny. What do you see as the potential of the gaming industry as one of the most kind of overt examples of playfulness in advancing social impact work? Where are there opportunities in the gaming industry?
Well, very much where we see our kind of place in that is we think about it like there's a bit of a funnel, right? You definitely can watch a documentary on an incredibly serious topic that's super informative, that will tell you everything you need to know at ground level about why you should care about something. But sometimes I think we forget what happens towards the top of that funnel. The person who's going to watch that more than likely has a leaning towards being open to those ideas in the first place. And what we can do with playful entertainment is start at the top of that funnel and present you, like we did with a game about a young girl taking photographs on a Mediterranean island, getting used to spending time with nature. And then once we've introduced those mechanics and had you be playful about exploring that place and capturing animals in those positions, we can then start to introduce some story moments about how the island is being overdeveloped, right? And suddenly, if we'd presented you with those themes up front, you might not have cared. You might have bounced off it, especially for those people who are sitting on the fence in the middle, right? So if we can kind of use play and experimentation and use the empathy and the agency of using those mechanics, we can start to then feed you some themes for the first time maybe that might open your eyes to be able to do that. So that's really how we see our position within that funnel, using play to at least open people's eyes to something for the first time. But there's definitely games that operate towards the bottom of the funnel, like a really great game called Bury Me, My Love, which is an interactive adventure about moving as a migrant, moving across Europe and texting your partner back in your home country. Like you can do things that are explicit, but I think it's important there's things at every part of that funnel.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate the concept of a funnel, because I think it also gives us the opportunity to think about, to borrow and then edit, a relay race, right? So if you're introducing audiences who potentially are not already sympathetic to such particular causes, maybe because of a lack of contact, and maybe because it hasn't been put in a way that's been enticing, they haven't engaged with this topic in a way that is playful and exciting, there has to be an accessible entry point. And by here, accessible, we mean fun, playful, engaging, meeting people where they are. What then would you like to see from other actors in this space if you've kind of welcomed new audiences who perhaps aren't readily sympathetic to some of these causes, but could have their eyes open or could have their hearts open slightly to some of these conversations through this initial touch point? What would you like to see happening next? What ideally should the rest of the funnel look like?
I mean, you've mentioned really great examples from television as well, right? Like, I think that we're kind of past this point. Maybe 10 years ago, we were definitely way focused on stuff at the bottom of the funnel, and now more willing to say, you know what, if I do a TV show with Danny Dyer, maybe I can get people in that I wouldn't have done if I'd got, say, a really experienced academic to talk on the same subject. So I think it is kind of happening in other forms of media already, right? How do we, put people, I mean, kind of co-opting people that you already know and are there for fun reasons, and being able to use them in television shows that then at a later point do that. I think it's already happening in other forms of media.
I love that. And also the provocation that this is a cross-media conversation. So maybe you enter through the game, maybe you end up in Danny Dyer's TV show, maybe you finalize at a wonderful documentary, who knows? But I like that idea of how we can engage across mediums across media to continue these conversations and deepen. Thank you so much.
And we talked about the phrase before about being able to Trojan horse that stuff in. It's something we constantly talk about, right? There's the wooden horse on the exterior, which is how we're wrapping it up for people to engage with for the first time. And there's what message we're keeping inside to open up at a later date once you've let us inside. It's just a good source of terminology we use internally.
And I think it really, the concept of the Trojan horse is important because it also highlights the intentionality. You know, you have intentionally reflected on what we could use this opportunity to convey or to engage with or to explore. And that takes collaboration with other industries. So over to you. I'm coming to you next, Danny. What do you, sorry, I've just come from you, Danny. I'm heading over to you, Howard. We're getting there. From a psychological perspective, what is it that increasingly attracts audiences towards play? So you mentioned kind of some of the shows you've worked on and that element of competition and us being engaged in following sometimes pain, sometimes other people's joy. What do you think is increasingly pulling audiences towards play?
Well, I'm going to go back to the 1960s. There's a book by Eric Berne called Games People Play, which is a behaviorist book, and marketeers use it, and it's still worth looking at, so you can now Google it and buy your book on Amazon. But the whole principle is, how do people interact? And so from our perspective now is, how do we get people on board early on and to engage in media? I often get involved on production meetings in the early stages of development to help think about how do we engage audience, how do we communicate certain messages with audiences, often around mental health, how are we portraying stories correctly, but also in terms of engaging the public with TV. they are competing with so many other mediums. When somebody's watching TV, even if they're watching something on Netflix and they're consuming it on SVOD, they're still also competing with something else on their phone and other forms of distraction. So how do you make sure that they are engaged with your product? And even with gaming, they're multitasking. So you've just got to think of other ways to engage your audience. And so we are thinking about motivation, we're thinking about rewards, other elements of making sure that they feel that they are part of the stories. And there's two elements to that. One is gameplay within a game. If you're watching trailers at the moment, you know the BBC is often running other games online that pulls you into the story, asking an audience to vote. They feel that they've got some power over the outcome of what's happening on a project. So that form of engagement brings them much more into that layer of production. But then there's also another element when we're looking at observational documentaries or true crime series. And this is a bit of the interplay between there's play, but there's also the parenting that goes with the play. So the parent tries to guide play with their students, with their children. And I think that a lot of media is actually all about good parenting, surprisingly. So parenting at one level, in production, you have production managers that parent all of the other minions around them to make sure that everyone's in the right place and have all the right gear. But there's also the parenting that happens from producers to parent an audience, to make sure that they're engaged. How are we gradually feeding an audience into a story so that they feel engaged, and maybe even to the point where they feel that they're one step ahead of the story, even though we've actually controlled the parameters. Whenever you watch any true crime series, you're watching with the idea that, I know how this is going to end. I know who the baddie is. And that's being led by good producers who are writing the script, who are creating the story to draw you in. So this is the parent, being us, the producers, trying to create a story that engages and draws in an audience and gives them a sense of they have control over this. Any good parenting is about control. If I said to a child, what do you want for dinner? And the child says, well, I want something that you really can't make. You're stuck. Good parenting is, what do you want for dinner? You have option A or B. The child feels empowered because they've made the decision, but you're the one who's controlled the parameters. So the same with our audience in storytelling, whether it's an observational documentary or true crime, we are guiding them, we're controlling the parameters, but they feel that they're really engaged and have got control. So that brings in this idea of both play and parenting.
That's a really exciting a direction to take us down, because I also think inadvertently you're alluding to the way that our viewing patterns have changed with elements like the second screen. And so part of the importance of having that engagement, such as voting, I'm specifically referencing that you mentioned, such as literal games alongside TV shows. So you might have the Kardashians. Not that I watch that because I'm super classy. And then you've got the Kardashian, and then you've got the Kardashian game, or you've got Love Island, and then you've got like the little articles in the app, or the ability to like vote on via app. And I think that's quite an important element to think about, because part of that is a gamification of even like television content in a different way and in an increasingly prominent way. And your recognition of the design around how we can keep audiences focused and engage different elements and different practices feels quite important. Where have you seen a particularly good example of where folks have used different types of engagement alongside a piece of content to parent audiences, so to speak?
I actually think the best stories around that are the true crime series, because you can still Google it and find out if it is a true crime series, you know what the answer is, but you still want to be taken along a journey. And so I think those are actually sometimes the best formats. But also the same when The Jury, which was a great Channel 4 series. I think we're just making series 3 at the moment. And again, you can look up, these are based on real cases. So you can find out the outcome. But the interesting part of that is to see how the jury interacts with each other. As compared to normal audiences where you're drawing on a real broad range and a random range of jury members, these people are purposely chosen because they're outliers. They have different views. So you are kind of gaming it. You're trying to actually prod different parts of somebody's personality or outlook to see then how does that interact with a different kind of A or B character.
That's really fascinating. And I'm particularly interested in this point around true crime that you've referenced twice. At the Power of Pop Fund, we invest in pop culture that makes a difference. And we think about pop culture as not just the content itself, but the way that the content becomes owned by the audience. And by that, I mean, you have the TV show, then you have the meme, then you have the character analysis and the fan fiction, and then you have the polls about what's going to happen next. And increasingly, where we have audience interaction with screenwriters and producers across series, for example, you release Love is Blind, and then you have a break, and then we see how the audience is responding, and then you have the reunion show after the audience has engaged with it. So the questions in the reunion are actually responding to what the audience has highlighted as the critical elements. That there is part of this playfulness that we're seeing as part of content production. And I'm really intrigued by what you're saying about true crime, because we see that a lot. You've got the true crime doc, then you have the series separately that covering the same story, then the podcast that somebody randomly comes to analyze. So I think it's quite an interesting point.
I mean, I would want to add that there is an ethical balance in this, because what we do when we create content is we are trying to manipulate contributors. We're trying to engage them in a certain thing to see what the outcome is. We try to manipulate an audience. And my concern sometimes is, are we pushing people down the wrong agenda with either incorrect information or manipulating an audience so then they have a certain reaction to the players? I work in welfare, often on productions, things like Big Brother, where I will very gently try to manage and talk to the editorial team to make sure that we're telling a story accurately and safely. But then you might have, and I'm not saying they do this, but then you might have the social media team that might bait an audience for another story. And sometimes I might have to step in and pull back to make sure we are trying to do this ethically without creating a big struggle for somebody. Once they leave the house, they're let loose into an audience and suddenly they're realizing this is what people have been saying about them, but that can be produced by social media. So I think there is a careful balance. And I'd much prefer that we have nice and positive stories, because that makes us feel good as well, rather than the baiting into the downward spiral.
We need to get you in more spaces, I think. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Panayiota, the Lenny Henry Centre for Media Diversity has recently released a report which you led and were really impactful with, exploring and calling for more diversity, but also more playfulness and more joy in the narratives that we're exploring around marginalised and minoritized communities. What would you like commissioners and creators to take from some of that learning and apply to content?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Maxine. Yes, before I answer your question, I would like to give a little bit of context.
Please.
About the work we did with various experts from communities themselves, marginalized communities, as well as media diversity experts, people who have been working in the industry on diversity for many years. So for us, that was a very learning-rich experience project, because it was the first time we decided to bring together media diversity experts and community people. We were used to speaking to either the media experts or the community people. So it was a very interesting endeavor, very interesting project to think about bringing both sides together and see what dialogue we can develop and what lessons for commissioners, for editors, and everybody else who is involved. That was not a light or playful activity to bring them together, because we had to carefully select experts to form 3 panels of experts. One, experts working on disabled people in the media industry or disabled community generally, another panel on ethnic minorities, and a 3rd panel on working class people. So we had meetings with these 3 panels, and we really understood how difficult it is to develop a common thread of communication between the community people and the media people, because the community people were there to say what we want, what's best for us, but the media people were there to say what's feasible, what resources, what means we have, and what we can do, which might not be what exactly communities expect from us. So we had to develop some kind of like communication which will allow us to reach conclusions that will be useful for both parties. for the media experts and for communities, of course, themselves. So as you said, Maxine, in the report, the common conclusion across 3 panels, for all 3 communities, broadly speaking, if we name them communities, was that, okay, we've had enough with drama, with victimization, with misery, and negative, deficit-based portrayal of our communities. Whereas, and that was a very awakening message for all, I think for us as researchers, but also for the media experts, because media experts, people who have been working hard on diversity in the industry, know very well how difficult it is for professionals, creatives from those communities to access the industry, to gain leadership roles, to have independent decision-making in the industry. So somehow they thought that good portrayal, authentic portrayal, is a portrayal that sheds light on the difficulties those communities have. But community representatives, community experts themselves, said rather the opposite. That, yeah, there are all that, but also we have so many cultural richness and nuances you can talk about. Of course we have problems. Of course we have areas we feel that we're marginalized, we're disadvantaged, and all this. But at the same time, for others to understand us, they need to see the full picture about us and our communities. And the full picture is a picture where there is a lot of humor, a lot of fun, a lot of creativity, a lot of cultural richness and legacy and heritage based on our backgrounds and our long histories, that people, other communities that have or do not have anything in common with us, need to see. So that was a core, very, very important message that it was a surprise for us as a researcher, and somehow, I think, help the media experts feel a little bit less guilty about not always talking about problems and problems and problems, which of course we shouldn't lose sight of the problems, but it's not just problems. So the recommendations we also stress and flag up in the report are recommendations for all different actors in the industry, including commissioners and editors. For instance, for commissioners, one key recommendation, and here is my answer to your question, is that actually one of the commissioning criteria should be actually the content itself, because we know, those of us who have been working on evaluating diversity funds initiatives from various broadcasters and other organizations in the industry, that most of the focus when it comes to commissioning is on diversity at the company and production level. So the panel somehow suggests that we need to go before that, before we see who is in the company, who is going to be the production team, what's the background, how much diversity there is to see actually the content itself, the story, and to somehow prioritize, or at least provide equal opportunity to stories that shed light on humor, fun, creativity within communities, to also have good chances to be commissioned. And when it comes to editors or to the actual creative process, they say they were in favor of co-authoring, of communities with lived experiences be involved in co-authoring the stories. Because it's so difficult, especially if you don't have the lived experience as a script writer yourself, to actually you provide really inspiring, it might be fairly accurate, but inspiring account for those communities you want to speak to and somehow represent. So co-authoring, it was a very important message to send us. And overall, through other recommendations, which I don't have the time now to present, they ask media experts to go beyond the common language around diversity, the diversity optic, as they call it, and start talking more about power sharing with the communities. So somehow to share the power of creation and creativity with the communities.
It's so important to kind of explore and really excavate the undertone of some of these recommendations. I think what can be quite interesting at this point of collaboration, where we're trying to bring together change makers and researchers and creatives, is that sometimes we have competing motivations. And I think even in the language in which we're answering this question and we're segging between communities and audiences, I find that quite a fun example as somebody whose work sits at that kind of intersection of the motivation. I think the part of what you're speaking to is accountability to communities and how you represent them, which is kind of linked to your point, Howard, about responsibility, right? And like safety and being proactive in maintaining and establishing of psychological safety. And I think that's kind of tied up often to this point about the obligation and the duty we have to communities and how we tell our stories. And sometimes that can be at odds, which is what you were starting to mention, with the desire to get as large an audience as possible, which sometimes drama and fear tactics and extremeness draws audiences. And so how do we find how do we find balance in these conversations so that we can collaborate? And how do we find shared language and entry points where we can collaborate? And that leads me to my final question for the group, which is, we all know reward is an effective motivator. There are rewards for folks who get audiences to watch content. That's why they want to do that. And for those in the social impact space and in research, there is maybe more of a moral reward, but there are rewards for us actually achieving that social and environmental impact. So what can we do from each of our vantage points and each of your kind of professional positions to reward practices that facilitate positive impact? How can we establish and strengthen reward systems to facilitate social impact?
So I'm going to unpick that slightly and say I think it depends what stage we recognise and celebrate on, because as you acknowledge, we have social impact rewards, you got a great audience rewards. Can we have the two together and then both on level footing, and that those values and those achievements have equity? So I think what BAFTA did with their Greener Light season this summer was fantastic. It was saying from BAFTA's perspective, they value climate content, they value climate stories, climate storytelling, the people who tell those stories, the people who experience those impacts of climate. And it's not just hidden away in this corner with people who already know about it. It's BAFTA, it's everyone in our industry has an opportunity to be a part of that conversation. So yeah, I think it's what stages we celebrate on as much as what the rewards are.
Thank you so much. Any thoughts?
It's a bit more of a dry policy thing, but in the games industry now, we have a series of tax credits that are available for productions, right? And we already have a system for ticking a load of boxes for things about the types of people that work on the project, or whether it feels British enough or not. Like, we already have a system. Why can't we tie some of those tax credits to both the types of people we have working on a production and the type of background they're from, but also how much social impact an individual project has, and how can we assess that so that we can financially incentivize productions to make things that have an impact, not only ones that celebrate Britain or make a lot of money, right?
Thank you so much. Howard?
Well, I mean, it's actually difficult, from a psychologist, it's a difficult question to answer, because when we talk about rewards, particularly if we're thinking about the brain, we're thinking about those endorphins, we're thinking about those dopamine hits. So what makes you feel good? And that should be done on both levels. Individually, when we do debriefings with production teams, I ask them to just maybe keep a bit of a diary on their production of what went well, because often we don't sing our own praises, and people should be encouraged to look at their CV and believe what they write on their CV, but also from every production to go, did I do a good job? Am I happy with it? But if something didn't go so well, you turn it into your professional development. What did I learn? How can I grow? So you're still getting some sense of reward out of this. Every project that we should go into shouldn't just be a vehicle to pay the bills. Sometimes we don't have a choice. But you should be always trying to don't be a passenger. I think this actually builds on from what Paris was saying earlier on, that you should be passionate about what you do. So any job that we do, every project should be about purpose. Resilience comes from having purpose. If you don't have resilience, or if you don't have purpose, you'll tread water and you'll drown. So having resilience, having a sense of purpose will drive you. So when you go into a job, already people should be thinking, what do I want out of this? Do I want to learn a new skill? Do I want to collaborate with somebody? Do I want to be part of a particular message, making meaning, communicating something to an audience, bearing witness? And then you've got your purpose, and that's your reward.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think I'm quite close to Howard's point of view, in the sense that I don't want to romanticize things too much, but the truth is that because financial rewards can face issues regarding short-termism, that actually it can be a one-off, and also they might somehow be a form of bribery. At least in our research, in academic research work, we say, don't give money or don't give material rewards to people. But for the kind of research we do with communities and the industry, I think reward can and should have two forms. The first form is purposeful participation and inclusion. Purposeful, very specific focus towards achieving a target, achieving a goal. So to involve communities in the creative process in order really to tell them, we need this and that from you. What do you think? And then accountability. So participation and then part of accountability back to the communities to actually say to the communities, this is what we managed to do. This is, excuse me, what we did manage to do for this and that reason, to be accountable so that you develop trust and somehow better communication in the longer term when it comes to portraying those communities in a way that really represents them.
Thank you so much. This has been such an enjoyable conversation, and I think there's so much to take away from this. Thinking about the balance of what is possible and what we would want in a dream scenario compared to what is feasible and what we can do right now. Thinking about how we can tag team across media to guide audiences through a funnel, to reach out to audiences who might not be sympathetic yet, but to get them to a point where potentially they could be by using play. And to remember that impact is not only limited to documentaries. We can all optimize our content to create really brilliant social impact. Thank you so much, Charlie, Danny, Howard, Panayiota. It's been a joy. Thank you.